From Matthew, the 16th chapter. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter was quick to answer, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. This is the word of the Lord, and I invite you to please be seated. When my wife Katie and I lived in the Twin Cities, there was a problem in our family. And the problem had to do, bear with me, with groceries. Groceries. Actually, not necessarily groceries so much as it had to do with grocery stores. You see, throughout Minneapolis, St. Paul, there is this chain of upscale grocery stores called Kowalski's. Anybody been to Kowalski's before? All right, some of you. If you've never been to Kowalski's before, you need to know this, that Kowalski's is not your ordinary grocery store. You see, Kowalski's is a grocery store on steroids. It is. Kowalski's isn't just about getting your bread, milk, and eggs. Oh no, Kowalski's is a shopping experience. If it's okay for a guy to say that this about a grocery store, I kind of have a crush on Kowalski's. At Kowalski's, you can get cheese from Switzerland. You can buy live lobster out of a tank. You can get fresh sushi, fresh walleye from Canada, bread so fresh it's still warm. There are homemade pastries and cheesecakes and hand-pulled mozzarella cheese. I don't even know why you want hand-pulled cheese, but it sounds delicious, huh? You can purchase olives from Italy. You can purchase any flavor of Ben & Jerry's ice cream ever created. There's even a Starbucks coffee shop in Kowalski's, at least the one we frequented. And there, every morning, little grandmas and grandpas would be gathered to read the newspaper in the morning. Folks, the Kowalski's we frequented even had a spa on the second level of the store. And when you were ready to check out, get this, they would even walk your groceries out to your car if you wanted. Folks, Kowalski's is no ordinary grocery store. It is a shopping experience, and it was a problem for our family. It was a problem because Kowalski's, as you can imagine, it wasn't the cheapest place to buy groceries. In fact, it was downright expensive. And given how seductive the shopping experience was, how they had this way of making everything look so delicious as you walked through the aisle, you always ended up purchasing twice as much as you intended to purchase. It was a problem. And for us young adults, it made no sense to shop at Kowalski's. It was dangerous, but we just couldn't seem to resist Kowalski's now and then. We knew what we should do, where we should shop. We knew we shouldn't shop there, but we just couldn't resist. Well, all that to say, in our story today, that feeling that Kowalski's gave me started welling up inside when I read this story from the book of Matthew. I got that feeling that when it comes to the life of faith, I know what I should do. I know what I think is right, what the right answers should be. But when it comes down to it, I just can't, or I just don't. Let me explain. In our reading today, Jesus is gathered with his disciples and asks them what I think is a dirty question. A question that just isn't fair. It's as though Jesus is giving these disciples kind of an impromptu quiz here. You see, Jesus asks his disciples, you heard the question, who do you say that I am? Who do people say that I am? And I imagine those disciples instantly started looking at the ground like this, or off in the sky like that, like students in a classroom hoping that the teacher just doesn't call on them after they've asked a question. Because I've got to believe when Jesus is in your midst, that's not a question you want to mess up. It sounds pretty easy. Who do people say that I am? And yet, it also sounds a bit like a trick question, doesn't it? Well, eventually, after a long moment of silence passes, one of the disciples bravely says, or maybe not so bravely, well, Jesus, actually, some say that you're John the Baptist, Then another disciple pipes in, yeah, but others think you're Elijah. And still others think maybe you're Jeremiah. Some say you're one of the prophets, And as they're speaking, as we hear this story, you start to realize that none of them know quite for certain. There's no certainty in any of their voices. That though they speak of what others say about Jesus, they're really speaking for themselves. Jesus, we're actually not so sure. Jesus then repeats the question. You heard the story a little more pointedly. Who do you say that I am? And if you've been around the church for a while, you remember how this story goes. This guy, Simon Peter, we're told steps forward. And I've always been told that he steps forward sort of confident, bold, and strong, with a clear conviction, extending his chest a little bit. In pride, he loudly professes, you are the Messiah, Jesus. You are the Son of the living God. And Jesus, we hear, then turns to Peter and with pride in his voice said, blessed are you, Simon, because you get it. You know and understand. And so, Peter, you're the rock. You are the rock. On you, I will build my church. Now, I've always been taught that Jesus recognizes that strong, bold accuracy of Peter's faith, his answer, and therefore picks him from that bumbling band of timid, unsure disciples and rewards him. Peter, you gave the right answer. Now, when I hear this story and I hear Jesus' question, who do you say that I am? And I wonder what I would do if someone were to ask me, who is this Jesus? Who do you say Jesus is? I know what I should say. I know I should give some bold, clear, and concise answer like Peter, right? But there's a problem. There's a problem. Sort of like what I ran into at Kowalski's. There's a problem. Even though I know what I should do, what I've been taught to do, I don't. You see, I don't know if I'm always as sure as Peter. I know there are nice and neat answers that I should give, but folks, if I'm honest, when it comes to the life of faith, I think I find myself more with those disciples than with Peter. Does this make any sense? Personally, I never feel like I have those nice, neat answers like Peter had. And to be honest, I don't think I'm alone. I don't think I'm alone in feeling that way. In fact, I think most of us, most of the time, are like those disciples in this story. And so every time I've read this story, I've gotten stuck here. Stuck because I think it leaves most of us feeling like those bumbling disciples, knowing what we should do or should say, yet finding ourselves more like those disciples, left wondering if we stack up in comparison to those Peters of the world. I could be wrong, but I think most of us see ourselves so not like that clear and concise Peter. And so very similar to those often timid, unsure disciples, often a little fuzzy on this whole Jesus thing now and then. Folks, I get stuck here. I've gotten stuck here. That is, until I started wondering about this story. Wondering if I've maybe been reading this story all wrong. All wrong. You see, I wonder if Peter, bear with me here, I wonder if Peter, way back when, wasn't all that unlike those disciples who gathered around him. I mean, what if when Jesus asks, "Who do you, Peter, who do you say that I am?" What would it be like if Peter really wasn't as bold and clear and strong and concise as we've been taught to hear him? Think about that. What if we were to read Peter just as unsure as all the rest of those disciples, humming and hawing, answering Jesus, Jesus, well, you're the Messiah, right? The Son of God, maybe? That's what we've heard you say, I think, Jesus. For those who have been around the church for a while, I know this isn't what we've been taught about Peter, but what if Peter was more like those other disciples, more like you and me, huh? Like that student in a classroom called out by the teacher, afraid, unsure, knees knocking, kind of fuzzy on what the right answer should be. And even though he's fuzzy and timid, humming and hawing, what if Jesus, even though Peter is less than confident, what if Jesus, with a big smile on his face, knowing that this faith stuff isn't easy to comprehend, with joy, what if Jesus turns to Peter and says, "I choose you. I choose you anyway. You and all my disciples, with this little seed of faith you have, I choose you to build my church." The story sounds a little different that way, I think. Folks, I think there's a certain brand of faith that is obsessed with being right, with having those clear, concise answers for everything, a faith that's black and white. A Christianity that says, for example, if you're Christian, you should affiliate yourself with a certain political party or vote in certain ways. Good Christians behave this way or that way. They can quickly quote Bible verses to any of life's problems. And if you live your life the right way, Jesus will reward you like Peter. Huh? Folks, I just don't think that's how God works. I don't think God looks at our lives of faith like, bear with me here, like a spelling bee. That if we get the answer right, we win, and all the others lose. Huh? This faith we share isn't about right answers. In fact, I don't think it has anything to do with the rightness of our lives at all. In fact, I think it has to do, well, it's all about a God who looks at each one of us just as we are and claims us, grabs a hold of us. That's what happened to Peter and those disciples, I think. I don't think it was the perfect answer that got Peter on God's good side. Rather, I think Jesus saw Peter for who he was. Just an ordinary guy like you and me with more questions than answers, maybe a few doubts, maybe a few fears. Jesus looked at Peter and those disciples, and, well, Jesus looks at you and me for that matter, and says, "You're the kind of people I want on my team. You're the ones I claim." Folks, this story isn't about Peter doing what he should. Rather, it's a story of a wild and unpredictable love that this God of ours has. God grabbing and holding on to those we least expect, those with doubts and fears and worries, those with less than perfect faith. It's a story about Jesus catching us regardless of how we feel we measure up when it comes to this faith business. Folks, when Lars, our older son, was a little boy, just around 2 years old, he and I loved to walk down to a park that was a few blocks from our house, a few blocks away. And when Mom wasn't around, Lars would climb up the playground equipment to the very, very top. When Mom was around, we didn't go quite as high. But he would climb up one rung after another, and he'd climb up to the very top, up to a platform that was above my head a good way. Again, we didn't do this when Mom was around, huh? And while Lars was standing up there, he'd look at me and he'd give me a little eye, and I'd do this. Jump, right? Admit it, dads. How many of you have done this? Huh? Yeah, a few of you guilty. I'd say, jump. And you could see him a little worry in his eyes. His knees would start to shake a little bit. And then he'd jump. He'd fling himself into the air, and I'd catch him. And then the first thing he'd say was, again. But he'd jump. He jumped because he knew I'd catch him, right? That's what the life of faith is, folks. It's about knowing we're caught. We're caught. We're caught in the arms of this God who will never let go. Thanks be to God. Amen.